Hey guys, Alex here with Paragon Performance. Today we're going to be showing you how to install your C8 Z06 lowering springs. These are going to give you approximately a 1-inch drop front and rear. For the standard Z06 guys, this will be a 30% increase in spring rate as well. The Z07 guys, it's going to be about a 25% increase in spring rate. Let's get to this install. All right, so we're going to start here by opening our frunk. And then we will need to remove these two plastic trim panels on both sides, as well as this one in the center. These just pull out. I'm going to pull up on the corners here to release the tabs. There's one here in the center. Now we've got that off, we're going to get to the top of our strut back here and get the bolts and the connector unplugged from it. All right, so we're going to start here with the connector. We're going to remove it from where it's attached to the strut here. And we need to release this red tab by pulling it back and unplug it. We're going to remove the 3 13mm nuts. All right, now raise and support your vehicle. Before we remove the strut out of the vehicle, we're going to start here by disconnecting the sensor from the front lift assembly, as well as unbolting the hose for the front lift assembly. So we're going to pull the safety tab down and then depress and unplug and then tuck that out of the way. And using an 11mm socket, we're going to take this banjo bolt out. It will leak a little bit of fluid, so put a drain pan underneath it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this bolt out of the bottom of the strut. It is a 21mm on both sides, so you'll need a wrench to hold the nut on the other side, and then we'll remove this bolt out. Now that we have that bolt out, you're going to want to rotate the wheel so that way it opens up more space in this area for us, getting the caliper out away from it. And we need to pull it off the control arm. We will need to rotate the bottom of the strut just a little bit, and it'll come out and then down. Sometimes you may have to push down on the spindle assembly a little bit with some body weight. Okay. Then we need to rotate the bottom of the shock, and that will allow us to slip it out and straight down, watching the electrical connector that sits on the top of the strut to make sure we don't snag it on anything. All right, so the first thing we need to do in getting this deep in is we need to remove this clamshell off the back of here. Just using a small flathead screwdriver, you can kind of wedge it in here and release the clips that allow us to open this. Sometimes they can be a little difficult, and having a second screwdriver is sometimes necessary. So, all right, now we're going to remove the terminals out of this connector. Keep track of which wire came out of which hole. And then holding the clip like so, we're going to take our tool. It has a little bent end on it here that needs to point towards my thumb. And then we're going to insert this inside. It's going to be a little difficult to see what I'm doing, but it goes inside through a slot inside a purple clip inside. We're going to basically put it in there and then kind of push back. And then grab our wire and gently pull it out the back. The same thing with the other terminal. Okay, set that aside. Now there's a rubber boot here on the top of the strut. We're going to pull that off of here. All right, so next we need to get this disassembled, removing the nut here on the center of the shock to remove the top hat and spring assemblies. You don't need to use the spring compressor with these, as they have a helper spring and you can actually compress this spring by hand. However, if you're uncomfortable with it, you can use a spring compressor on it. Just keep in mind that this spring is pretty long and you're gonna have to compress that a lot. I find it easier just to do it by hand. So first thing we're gonna do is get this nut broke free. Then we're gonna hold this down and just loosen the bolt real slow. Okay, we got our nut free. Now we're just gonna let that helper spring extend. Collect the nut. So now we're going to disassemble this by removing the helper spring, dust boot, and top hat all off at once. Then we're going to slide the spacer plate and actual spring off. We're going to remove this spacer plate and transfer it over to the new spring. And now we can install our new spring on the strut. Now we're going to reinstall the helper spring and dust boot. There is no orientation requirement with this style of spring, so just put them on however you need. However, the top hat needs to line up with the straight line going down our strut, as well as the dust boot has a peg that goes into that hole on the top hat. Now we're going to stand it up and compress this helper spring by hand and reinstall our nut. All right, so we're going to reassemble our connector, installing the rubber boot first. Install our connector, making sure these are in the same orientation as what you took them out. Make sure they click into place, and then always double check that they seated correctly. Now we're going to reinstall the clamshell. Just like that, we've got it installed. All right, so we're going to get the strut reinstalled. We do have to keep in mind this alignment dowel that's here will fit into a specific hole up here. And then we need to make sure that the wire gets shoved up through the center here. Okay. We're going to rotate the bottom back in place. And then we're going to get this bolt reinstalled here on the bottom. All right, so now we're going to take our front lift assembly here. We're going to straighten it back up. All right, so now we're going to reinstall the hose. All right, replug in our connector. So we've got that strut mostly installed here. We still need to tighten and torque the 3 nuts here on the top of the strut, as well as plug in the electrical connector and put that back in its place as well. Then we're going to repeat the exact same process for the other side. All right, so we're going to start up top here. We are going to unplug the mag ride connector and remove the mag ride connector from the top here. And then we are going to remove the 3 13mm nuts, and then we will screw this one outer one here just back on finger tight for now. That'll keep that supported while we're doing the stuff in the fender well. As you can see, we already have our vehicle raised and supported and the rear wheels removed. You are going to need to do that on yours as well. We're going to walk you through the process of removing the fender liner here. First, we need to start by removing the 7mm screws on the bottom of the fender liner, front and rear of the wheel well. Then we will need to remove the 2 T15s holding the mud flap on and remove that. And then we'll remove the remaining T15s and plastic push clips and pull the fender liner out. All right, so the first thing we're going to undo here is we are going to remove the nut and the bolt out that holds the strut to the spindle assembly. Then we're going to move over here and remove the 3 10mm bolts that are holding this aluminum bracket on. This will give us access to the 4th bolt for the control arm. Then we are going to remove the 4 bolts from the control arm. Keep in mind these do have washers on the back side, and if you are not doing the track alignment, these washers need to go back on here between the control arm and the body here. And you can actually, when undoing these, pull the axle from the transmission. You just, when you put it back together, make sure that that has seated back into the transmission, or you will have a transmission fluid leak. Doesn't hurt anything, just double check that that did seat into the transmission. All right, so we've got everything undone here. We need to reach over the top here to that top nut on the strut. That's the only thing holding this in. Then we will undo that. And then you just need to drop it down past the axle. You can rotate it out and then pull it out past the fender here. All right, so we're gonna get this rear strut dismantled. We need to start here by removing the clamshell on the back of the connector. Then we will need to use our D-pin tool and remove the pins from this connector housing. And then we will need to remove this dust boot that covers the nut on the top as well. And then from there, we are gonna take, you don't actually need a spring compressor for this, as that helper spring that's up here is really soft. We're gonna hold this with one hand, and then we're going to undo this nut, and then we'll support it with both hands and let it come apart and decompress that. And then we'll dismantle and change out our spring and work on the reassembly process. All right, let's get the top hat installed. This does have a large rubber pin on here that needs to line up with the hole in the top hat here. Compress this helper spring and then start this nut by hand. All right, now we're gonna get that tightened up and torqued down. All right, so we've got this reassembled now. We need to work on getting the dust boot put back on the mag ride connector, as well as the actual connector reassembled itself. Keep in mind, there is no polarity specific on which one these go into. I usually just keep track of which one I took it out of and put it back in that one. All right, so we've got this all assembled. Let's get it put back in the car. All right, so we're gonna get the strut reinstalled back in the car, just using one of those nuts to hold it up there in place. And I'm gonna show you a quick tech tip to reinstalling the control arm. This does help to have an extra hand if possible for you. Then from there, the rest of the installation is pretty much reverse of how you took it apart. And then you're gonna repeat that same process for the other side of the car. All right, so on the control arm bolts, you have 2 long ones and 2 short ones. The short ones are the ones here with this pilot point. Your long ones are going to go on the outboard 2 control arm bolts. Your short ones will go on the 2 inboard closest to the strut. Keep in mind, we do need to reinstall the washers. There's one for every one of these bolts. For track alignment, the washer is going to get installed on the bolt. For non-track alignment, the washer gets installed between the control arm and the body. All right, so we've got these 2 started. We're gonna get the 2 center ones started after we've started to tighten these down, and then double check that your axle is seated in the transmission so we don't have that leak that we talked about. All right, go ahead and get them all tightened down, torqued into place. Then from there, you're going to get the big bolt installed in the bottom of the shock. That may require pulling down on the spindle or prying down on it to get some things to line up, as well as getting the sway bar link reinstalled. Then from there, you're going to reinstall your fender liner and mud flap. And then we're going to repeat that process on the other side of the car. There you guys have it. Pretty simple install. Lowers your C8 Z06 approximately 1 inch front and rear. Now I just got to convince this guy to put some wheel spacers on the back of here. As always, like, subscribe, and comment. We'll see you guys next time.